45 minutes. Will I get to the weird shit? Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Start out weird, I think.
Yeah, let's start at the weird shit.
Yeah, definitely start at the controversy.
Alrighty.
One second. There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of Crypto Art Week. I am your host, Lady Phoenix. I am joined by 2 esteemed guests, 2 of my favorite people in the digital art space. We have Jesse and Dylan. I think they are some of the brightest minds on the planet around this, broadly AR, VR, XR, crypto, all future and emerging technology and research, journalism. We really have 2 sharp people here. So please do yourselves a favor and make sure that you ask a question and make sure that you follow them online. Do you guys prefer Twitter or Instagram?
Either's fine.
Either's fine. Okay. So
I'm on Twitter more.
Okay. So whatever your preferred social is, you can shout that out at the beginning and then dig right in. Thank you very much, guys. Honored to have you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I will kick us off and then I'll send to you. So yeah, my name's Jesse Damiani. I am the Director of Emerging Technology at Southern New Hampshire University, curator and director of simulation literacies at Next Museum, which just opened in August in Amsterdam. It's a fine art and media museum in the Netherlands, first ever. And I've been a journalist for probably about a decade at this point, the past 5 to 7 of which have involved covering media and emerging tech. Dylan?
My name is Dylan Urquidi. I'm a researcher, designer, technologist, and engineer at Unity Labs, the research division of Unity Technologies. That at least is my awesome day job. And personally, I'm a generative XR artist. The majority of my work is only privately accessible. So pardon me if there isn't quite a bit of that out there. There used to be a number of my pieces on the Oculus store, but given certain terms of service changes, those have all been pulled off recently. But they might see light of day on another service here, or I'll just kick out some of my new private pieces publicly here. But I appreciate very much the opportunity to be speaking with Jesse. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while. Lady Phoenix, thank you very much for organizing all this. It's an honor to be part of this, and hopefully we can uncover some interesting conversations, and at the same time either piss some people off or not piss too many people off. So we'll see what we can do here. And on that note, let's start with obviously we're on the subject of crypto art, so. Something that's in the forefront of my mind constantly. We're already aware, we're on day 5 here. There are plenty of advancements and developments that are going on in this area. The past 2 years has been amazing. I remember CryptoKitties and knowing where I would see that going, but not anticipating that it would have come at this pace here. And it's been extremely amazing to see, like, Makerspace, Super Rare, and everyone else just really taking the reins and doing the heavy lifting of building the infrastructure that I believe this industry definitely needs now, but I didn't expect for at least another 3 or 4 years here. I do have certain perspectives that differ quite a bit with some of the current implementations, and any of the critique that I just want to preface that I might give. These are all my personal thoughts. They're just meant out of respect for the living artists that are doing a lot of the work right now, and the environment, the planet that the artists that are doing this work also reside in, and God forbid future generations might do the same. So on that note, let's talk about why processing an Ethereum contract is the equivalent of pretty much running a GPU full power for 6 days. And let's talk about the mindset of crypto art in the beginning here. So we've got a burgeoning field that needs artists, of course. We need participation. I work backwards from nothing is viable until we have a secondary market, and it's beginning to grow, but it's not there. It'd be great to see it there in 2 or 3 years, but we're in a situation where some artists are selectively taking a single one-off sale, a single artwork, and they're putting it up there, and it's going through the process, it's establishing the market, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have other artists that are, not trying to shame anyone. I do a good amount of AI-based art, generative art myself here. I tend to train only on my own original art from my data models and not rip off any training sets from living artists out of respect for consciousness personally. But let's talk about the artists that are kicking out 200 pieces a day. The artists that are exploiting the frequency of sale versus quality of sale, or reserving themselves a bit in exchange for making obviously what they probably and possibly need to be able to eat and pay their bills, but making the choice to force the additional processing of many, many transactions than would actually need to occur to possibly achieve the same result. Now, pardon the diatribe, I'll do this a few times, and I'm not trying to be rude, Jesse. I'm just trying to establish a perspective here. I come from an obvious position of privilege, personally speaking, in that I have my day job, which covers my bases. I'm a bit odd in the way that I handle art, and that I only ever work under aliases. I never release anything publicly for the most part. All my exhibitions, all of my VR experiences, all of my musical performances, all of my performance art, all my written art is all hidden behind aliases and almost only ever private invite. So I get this luxurious position to be able to play this masochistic mini game of sorts. But the artist that doesn't have that choice and still needs to put food on the table and they need to keep their bills paid, I want to propose the beginning of the discussion until, of course, we have a far more optimized approach. Yes, I understand the new version of Ethereum is supposed to optimize computation processing, and we should move all of our miners down to colder climates, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways to get around this, but begin the discussion that the artist that represents socially or personally that they care about the climate, they care about the environment, that they begin to consider what it means to perhaps make 10 times the profit at a slower number of sales on one item and one transaction, which again, the ramifications are the succeeding resales that occur and occur and occur, as opposed to kicking out 500 pieces a day onto whatever blockchain that they're doing here. Because there is a cost, and it's not a cost just for today, and it's not a cost for just the initial sale, be that the 5 cents that the 50 pieces they kicked out this hour sell for, or the $500 price that the one piece they kick out a day sells for. There's a responsibility, in my opinion, on the crypto artists that are involved right now to open their awareness, if they do represent that they care about these values, and understand that where it can be made and not affect their livelihood and their quality of life, we need to begin having this discussion. And it's an awkward one, it's an uncomfortable one, coming at the worst of times. We're trying to build a market here. We're trying to revolutionize an industry. We're trying to disempower the gallery structure that has held artists under their thumb for centuries, in my opinion. But I believe for the artists that are able to not indulge, we can begin to approach it in this manner. I myself do not push anything out under any crypto blockchain currently for these purposes specifically. I do have something out under Sedition, but is not crypto related, and it's honestly a favor to a friend. But I think we need to shape this discussion before artists like Connor Bell and myself and a number of others that are very concerned about this, before we're willing to jump into this market. And I think that the artists that are exploiting this, that don't need to be exploiting it to the degree that they are, I think we need to begin the discussion on how we represent that, because it is an indulgence. If you do not need to survive on what you're doing, you are incurring a future cost on the environment by spamming the blockchains. So I'll end my diatribe there. I can't wait to see Jesse shoot me down.
No, I actually wanna rewind to a little bit of a piece from my own life to sort of support that I'm with you, and I think actually it is incumbent upon us to figure out what the solution is. A couple of years ago, I was part of something that didn't end up working out, unfortunately. Just, you know, wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. But a friend of mine had the idea, sort of following in some other folks' footsteps, of turning basically the energy cost into a net positive by basically using these GPUs to power a solar farm, and start to think about using that to recircuit and to show people that there's potentially profit in renewable energy because of cryptocurrencies. Now, this was at the end of 2017, when making that argument was much easier than it became making that argument in January of 2018. And interestingly, I'm seeing a lot of parallels with that period of time to now in a more sort of micro way with crypto art, in the sense that I think something unlocked in the same way that around like spring, summer 2017, something unlocked in people's minds. And you just saw this like moon happening kind of across the board with cryptocurrencies broadly put. I think we're seeing an echo of that in art. And that brings a lot of really positive energy and a lot of like really important, as you're saying, Dylan, like market creation, which is urgently important to address a lot of existing structures. It also brings a lot of people who, because a lot of money is involved, start to figure out ways to, as you say, spam the blockchain. But it's not just spamming the blockchain. It's that sort of like vulture culture of like, how do you like take something that some people are doing from a place of like heart and enthusiasm and passion and start, selling penny stocks off it.
Yep.
And I think what I didn't see and what retrospectively would have been so helpful at that time would have been more people. I remember talking to people who were very bearish about crypto, who loved blockchain, but who were very bearish about crypto in, let's call it, August, September, October of 2017. And I think we're in that moment, if we're not even a little bit past the moment when we should have been doing it now. So I think I'm really glad that you are so coming at this so advisedly and so cautiously is the wrong word. It's not caution. It's with a sense of wanting to preserve what it can do without perpetuating further damage to the people involved. So I really appreciate the perspective. What do you think people, to carry the discussion, like what can some of these artists do if, say, they're like, I don't want to abstain, I want to be part of this movement? What do you recommend that they do?
Yeah, I think beautifully put on all your points. I think that's the challenge here, in that it's unfair to judge an artist that's lucky enough to be able to sustain a life of some sorts on their work, especially if they're in a field like this and they're fortunate enough to be getting more than $1 per sale, $5 per sale here. As that's nice to participate. Again, we're building a secondary market, but that's not going to put someone through college or feed anyone. But I think I would personally like to see the individuals who publicly represent themselves as caring about these topics, and then also representing that they're crapping out 20 pieces a day. I'm not going to call anyone out because it's not about shaming. That might be a necessity and it might be doing the job. But I think we need to establish, and I'll get to this later on with some of my longer term personal plans, how we can begin to, pardon me saying, but create a safety net and create a socialized structure where, and a means of certifying this, a means of putting a badge, putting some type of blockchain-based certification on artists that have achieved a position of comfort and security that extend a portion of that security to other artists that are trying to grow. And of course, we need to talk about what metrics would be involved. Is there a vetting process? Is this all contract driven, which it should be? These are deeper discussions, but this capitalistic, winner takes all, again, as you were saying, like this penny stock, just berate the quality of what we're really trying to do ethically approach, that can win. We see that winning in a country like America, in my opinion, and a few others. But I think we need to establish a type of network of sorts that can build this type of safety net, where an artist that is definitely showing that they're trying to participate, they're not trying to spam the blockchain, they reach out and say that, like, I don't need to kick out 100 pieces a day, but I need another $10 a day. And I'm genuinely showing that I'm participating. These are original works. Of course, they're being noted as tokens. Like, this is all valid. What about the artist that makes 20 million today? What about the artist that sells, 2 or 3 pieces this week at, 50,000, or more importantly, also, what about the collectors that are perhaps sitting on massive crypto fortunes that are just, spamming every single purchase with a bot right now on every available crypto art service? How can we make sure that these contracts also mandate that any of them that are also, because it's not the artists, they wouldn't do it if there was no market. It's the individuals that are also saying, oh, I'll just buy one of every single thing because I don't care at this point. how can we make sure that the resale process is also influenced by this? And this does bring up an awkward conversation that artists right now, like myself, that have veto power over where it is that our artwork is shown. As I've said, I have no problem pulling my work from a platform. And that's why it's not on these platforms, because you cannot pull it off these platforms with their current terms. I think that we need to begin this discussion about empowering the living artist, empowering the individuals that want to get in and build this field so that we can create a healthy culture instead of a vulture culture. And that's going to take a discussion. Hopefully that, I appreciate the invitation here and your perspective as well, Jesse. You do, I appreciate the amount of advocacy you do for politics and society and the environment on trying to actually better the future. This is what needs to go into this discussion, in my opinion, with crypto art. And it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice, and it's going to take a little bit of union and some agreements. But if we don't do this, we're leaving the field open to be capitalized by one of the major entities, one specific entity, in my opinion, right now, I won't name, that's going to be able to exploit this to a great degree. And the artists, the living artists, will not benefit from this. And the artists that need to jump into that field will be compelled to play this game. And that's fine if this is the only option. But discussions like these and artists that are comfortable enough to get off their laurels and understand that we can work together, I believe we can build something different. And it's not just belief. We can start our own equivalent, especially with decentralized finance, DeFi. We can get around the current crypto art services that exist. We can use DeFi to usurp the control that they already have and begin to pull that back into an area where the artists that choose to participate consent to these contracts. And we actually help foster new artists getting into this area. And we help keep people's power on, and we help keep food on the table. And we also help the planet not burn down from their compelled need due to the structure of the markets that are being created.
Totally. I mean, I echo that 100%. It's funny that it all, you often see this where we can isolate when we're talking about an emerging technology. You kind of like start to talk about it in a vacuum, like totally, disembodied, sort of taken completely out of the context of the world. And like we're talking about a lot of the same symbols and a lot of the same concepts that are kind of iterating and evolving. And I appreciate your impulse to start with the sort of most basic, obvious problem that we face as a species, because every discussion about the future sort of part and parcel has to begin with, like, separately, somebody was asking me sort of about like, what are the jobs of the future? Because a lot of the work I do at the university is around the future of work. And it's like, we need to start with the problems. Like there's probably a lot of new buzzy like types of employment we could talk about. But if we're going to be looking into renewable energy, we really need to focus on like, what are the jobs that sort of pipe us out to where our species survives. And it's also funny the way that these things sort of correlate. You referenced taking your work off a particular VR platform. I think there's something powerful in the convergence of these different communities that doesn't happen actually as much as you would expect. And so I'm also glad for the opportunity for us to talk about this a little bit, because we've now seen what happens when there's a presumption of, call it good faith, call it good sensibility, whatever it is, that can backfire in a really powerful way. And I think we're experiencing this in the VR community, and where a lot of us are grappling with it in a way that we put a lot of lip service to before, but now we're like, oh, now it's real. And just to kind of like pull back the curtain on this for folks who maybe are new to VR, and the upshot is that a couple months ago, Facebook announced that Facebook logins would be required to use Oculus headsets. Oculus was a startup acquired by Facebook about 6 years ago. And at the time, the founder had been told by Facebook that Facebook logins wouldn't be required. You could still use Oculus IDs. Of course, none of that was ever put in writing. There was nothing in user agreements. And so that's the framework that they've been operating on. And that's given a lot of people who maybe were concerned about extractive capitalist practices sort of a pass to kind of do this work with the presumption, again, that this wouldn't happen. And now Facebook came out and said that. And then on top of that, there's now, far and away the best standalone headset comes out that we found out yesterday pre-orders were up 5x the original device of the original Quest. Now we're on the Quest 2. I don't believe that like Facebook is intrinsically bad. I have a lot of friends that work at Oculus. I think they've propped up this market in a way that like we owe a huge debt of gratitude to. We would have had to wait another 10 years to get to the fidelity of VR without Facebook's engine behind Oculus. But now we need to have that hard conversation, and it's a lot harder to have it now than if we had really pushed it a few years ago. So I appreciate that, again, that you're bringing this up in this particular moment. I'd love to just kind of throw to you any reflections, because you referenced pulling your work off that platform, like any sort of notes from the field for folks coming into the crypto art community, regardless of whether they care about VR, but your experience as somebody who had your work on a platform that you were okay with, and then that sort of moment of reckoning when you felt like you need to pull it off.
Yeah, that's the question that's troubled me enough to not, as I mentioned, participate in any of the current ventures here. It's you have no choice when you join one of these platforms to a degree. Maker's Place, I believe, gives you a slight option, potentially, don't quote me, on being able to resell in a different market. But I mean, even aside from that, I mean, you can never leave this platform, and they're going to make their 97% or their 85 or whatever it is in redundant forms for every resale perpetually, potentially, for as long as we stay a species and don't become a type 2 civilization, God forbid. And that's a consent being made today. And that's an indulgence, in my opinion, for an individual that represents that they care about the things that we've discussed, but yet they do not need to do this for any other reason than ego or self-indulgence. And some of us are aware of certain artists that are playing this game. And, you know, in the same way that we might have family or friends that might say an offensive thing, perform an offensive action, either passively or actively, and anyone that cares, I mean, if we care about changing the future, and I don't particularly believe in free will, but if you're compelled to change the future, it certainly does help if you're proactive and you try to compassionately correct that situation to whatever degree you can. And we're in this situation now where, as I mentioned, it's the balancing act of, we need to build the industry, we need to build the markets, but there are individuals who simply don't need to, that are exploiting the situation right now. And I get it, it's fresh, jump in and maybe do a piece or two. But if exploitation jumps into the equation, you're not making an impact just today, as I mentioned. You're making it for as long as these digital items exist, as long as these blockchains exist. And that it just needs to be understood. Until we get to the concept, something as abstract as, say, time crystals, which, yes, something called time crystals actually exist. But until we can begin to utilize technology like that to have computation that can be at rest and not require power for computation, maybe that's next year, maybe that's next century, maybe it's never. We've got to have that discussion. What you proposed earlier, being able to use GPUs to be able to, you know, convert that over to another heat source, you know, similar to like nuclear energy, et cetera, whatever, like these are the approaches that we need to begin proposing, or at least encountering the individuals that are indulging with these alternative options. If we don't do this, we're consenting to damage today, damage tomorrow, and damage a century from now. And that's, who knows, maybe everything burns down tomorrow and it doesn't all matter. But it does matter.
Tuesday's coming.
Well, yes. Let's hope that's not the day. But yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation, because the issue is, what do? We scare someone away that's valuable to building the platform. We don't want that, obviously. We intimidate someone that maybe has personal sensibilities, maybe, you know, a mental condition, whatever it could be. We don't know the sensitivities it takes to encounter someone that might be performing this, but I think we need to inculcate it as a culture, and this doesn't need to be a manifesto or a mandate or anything. But in the same way that we have societal morals and norms that we're trying to foster and better as time and society evolves, I think it's got to be part of the conversation, and it's going to be awkward, you know, and we don't want to lose people, but what are we going to do, you know?
Well, but I think at the same time, like the magic, like when like, it's so funny remembering back, like in 3 or 4 years in emerging technologies just is like eons. But just how the sort of like brain space that, like the simple unlocking of like, oh, we can have new relationships with power and value. Like I never thought of that. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people were sort of waking up to that. reality. And that's really the power of these technologies. Most of the time, these technologies are janky. They don't live up to your vision. They are painful. You're the one kind of like encountering the bug, literally or metaphorically. But it's the thing that it's unlocking. And that, Dylan, is what I love about your work and about your presence, is like you're out there on Pluto figuring things out.
I try.
And so like that's I think using the moment to basically say, let's actually use these technologies for the change that they embody, rather than recodifying the things that are not working in the current world and that are, you know, creating a lot of the problems that we're experiencing. I also want to throw to you, like, you know, we're talking about the future, and you do a lot of work with machine learning. And like, how does machine learning and just like AI broadly as a concept sort of fit into all of this?
So this will be fun. Let me, to address this, let me circle back to the the topic of empowering the living artist. It's not just words. It's an extremely important thing right now. Crypto art is our first viable chance, in my opinion, to upend the control that the gallery industry has had. And let's be real about what the exchange of high-end fine art is. It's, you know, partial money laundering. It's a bunch of other things mixed in. There are some valid purchases, of course. It's, you know, tax haven work. It's whatever it needs to be. I won't name names, but yeah, those galleries serve their purpose, and the artists that are willing to or have been handpicked to play that game, or whatever happenstance occurs, like that's an interesting old paradigm. And it will obviously proceed to some degree. But we need to be able to take this power back here. We need to understand that an ethical blockchain for crypto art would perform a reverse engineering of the machine learning model of any potential artwork that would be submitted, especially multiple artworks where we can infer a model, or if we can ever actually get the source model, break that down and actually take their data set, which you can do to a degree with machine learning trained models, and be able to call out automatically with a blockchain contract. Let's say an artist today that samples their data set from a living artist, submits a generative piece that is nothing but a derivative of an individual that might be starving today, but working as hard as they can to keep the power on to submit another piece to, I don't know, make another $5. We need to have an automatic contract for any crypto art blockchain that represents themselves as caring at all about living artists, and not just the gallery structure, the hierarchy that's existed, that's performing operations, automatic blockchain operations on artwork that is submitted, so that we can say that there's a flag that pops up here with, oh, there's an 85% likelihood that you just jacked all of this artwork from this individual who's suffering right now. You know what? You're not allowed on this platform. And, you know, maybe go reform yourself, especially if you're comfortable enough to not have done what you just did. And the thing is, it's not about shaming someone who's just jumping in. We all have fun. There, in my opinion, there is no original art. There's no original anything. We're just reorganizing similar bits. It doesn't matter. But the individual that is proactively doing this, and I've called a few out privately, and maybe I've put a few posts up on social media that have broken down the process to break down some of their models without directly calling their names out. But these are the types of things that, for blockchains that truly want to care about the artist, instead of just building a corporate structure, a power structure, these are things that need to be in there. This is not rocket science. This technology exists. So any blockchain that would want to sell a living artist work and would be able to represent that they actually care about the artist could just do this today. These methods will become more and more refined, and anyone that isn't using something like, say, differential privacy, which could mask what I'm mentioning, and yeah, a crafty engineer, an artist could use this approach, and then you'd submit it, go, 50-50, you're this artist, but maybe not. Okay, well, you made a half-assed effort to make sure at least it appeared that you weren't overtly stealing someone's entire library of what might have been physical work or digital work that they had done maybe for decades before you had decided you were going to train your model on it. These are the types of approaches that if morals matter, we've got to begin having this discussion. It's not just profit. And these aren't pie in the sky things. Every one of the talks that I've heard, every one of the discussions is rightfully so focusing on the business side of this. I get it. And the tech side of this, wonderful. Solve the problems. Again, we need this to occur. The way that if it's not being open source, the patent system exists, it should be exploited. We should use entities to exploit the fact that, in my opinion, many patents or the whole system shouldn't exist. But if it does, use them to file the patent immediately, so that in 20 years, everyone gets it open source. These are the mindsets that we need to begin using, because that type of blockchain is what has to take over as, given your profession as well, as the value of human education, of training up one's biology to express a certain set of knowledge or creativity. It's not that it will lose biological intrinsic value, but the value to the market will deplete. We're seeing this with virtual pop stars and virtual, icons at this point here. It's not faulting that they exist. We're simple monkeys. We're easy to be fooled. We got our dopamine, we get our adrenaline or oxytocin, and we're fine. But we've got to understand that when an individual with a master's degree is still struggling, and maybe still struggling and also creative and still trying to make some money on the blockchain, that's only going to get worse. And that unless we flip this flow of the money going mostly to the top and is being distributed to the majority of all of us conscious beings here, well, then we're walking into a trap. And if the trap we're walking into, we've got a limited amount of time to begin demanding, and we might not get it, but begin demanding at some point that if they're not even going to implement it, they acknowledge that these things are possible. And they just tell us straight up, I'm not going to do it. And I don't care about that. That is not my priority. Or, oh, it's been on the backlog for 5 years or something. Or, oh, that sounds too arcane. They need to be shamed, or they need to come up with an explanation that says, we don't care. I'll end on this point on this area here. In the same way that anyone that represents that they care about encryption, or they're a platform that is encryption and privacy first, if you're not using homomorphic encryption specifically in every area that can be used throughout your entire tech stack, auditable homomorphic encryption at best, then you either don't understand technology or you're devious. And these are the things that, when they relate to eventually what these cryptoart blockchains will facilitate with persistent XR experiences, that eventually with things like Neuralink and other technologies won't be outside of us. There'll be things that we share, and we will want our conscious experiences protected on the blockchain. These are things that we need to begin demanding today. And this might sound like fantasy, but we just saw fantasy in the last Neuralink demonstration. The rate of advancement that's going on here, this is part of crypto art. Consciousness will become an art form at some point. We need to begin demanding these protections and these royalties before the limited amount of effort and so-called creativity and uniqueness we contribute has no value compared to any model that is trained at some point.
Man, I got goosebumps when you said that. I've been thinking about, very much in line, I've been thinking about how VR, there's going to be this aspect of kind of clunkiness and friction, no matter how lightweight you're able to get the hardware, and how in the grossest possible terms, I don't believe this to be true, but in the grossest possible terms, really what VR is the training wheels for BCI. And so you've got this happening. You've got like the starter kit and the lesson, that the development of best practices and understanding of a medium, over here, and then you have this, and this is an unformed thought. So I'm going out into the fog, so we'll see where I end up. But like we're moving from this precious object paradigm, and we see this, like at Next Museum, people come and there's no sense that this art is for sale at all. You're there to have an experience, and of course that tips into its own economy and the way people are sort of talking about the experience economy and the sort of like cheapening of what we mean when we say an experience. But you have this precious object paradigm that is itself purely an economy, and as you said, like art is a very convenient commodity that fits into that economy. Now, obviously, the artists aren't thinking of it that way. But when you're talking about the market sort of dictating what it becomes, the market dictates what it becomes. So you've got the precious object paradigm and like the blue chip and all like everything we're coming to from art, and you have this development of a language of consciousness. And what I hear you describing, or what it's sparking in me, is that there's this convergence where that gets really toxic, where like we go from it being like, yeah, it's like pure capitalism and there's some like, you know, underhanded dealing and some, like dark money and stuff like that, to like, no, now people are capitalizing your consciousness.
Yes.
And I really appreciate you highlighting that, because it's so easy to get caught in the little compartmentalization of like this technology or this movement of this technology or, this buzzword. But when you look at those two big waves, that's a really, really daunting, we don't want to live in that world. We don't want to be in that universe where your consciousness is for sale.
No, and I appreciate that. Appreciate that reply. I appreciate how you process that. This is extremely important. So I've been working with BCI in EMG and EEG research for about 4 years. Eventually, I hope to be able to share a bit of what I've done. It's all behind the scenes at this point. But it's with that in mind. It's the monetization of the conscious experience and the necessity that will occur as soon as business, as soon as finance, specifically employment, offers a benefit to the individual that takes the chip, that inhales the nanobot, that does whatever augmentation it is, that initially wears the glasses 24/7, and allows for all the sensors to just feed 24/7 unencrypted information to whomever. This slow boiling of the pot with the frog, of us gradually consenting. I'm not trying to say that that should not be a choice that someone can make. I don't necessarily believe in choice, but I believe that the perception of making that choice should be allowed to be had by the individual whose biological structure is compelled to want that choice. But for those of us that want something else, for those of us that might treasure the fact that you have an inner dialogue, just think about that. You have the ability to imagine a set of words that could be so offensive that you would never say them out loud, especially not on this call. That's what I want to protect. The second that we take this convergence internally, that must exist, that inner dialogue, that impression of the ability to deliberate thought as we begin living persistently in this blended metaverse, XR, wild environment of consciousness. We've got to be able to trust what I call the kernel. You need to know that what you came in with, what you had as a biological entity, and what it is you believe you would evaluate internally without any external influence is protected. And that's where I extended it to a blockchain contract earlier for the offloading, and it sounds insane, but offloading processing of consciousness at some point that can exist in a perpetual blockchain contract. These are things that must be encrypted and protected in the same way that when you get your chip, that inner dialogue is also homomorphically encrypted and protected, which also comes with quantum attack protection as well. I should note that all the current forms of encryption are not ready for the computers that are about to, if they pull off what they're claiming at some point here, crack everything retroactively. That means all the data that has been protected now will be an open book. So the companies and the technologies that we're talking about today need to implement it. These excuses that things like homomorphic encrypted processes take too much compute time. Well, IBM said, pick the pain points and we'll optimize them. And they did. And they continue to. Any one of these barriers that are being held up for someone to say that, no, we'll get to it eventually. Whatever they're not getting to today, and maybe it's not everything in an entire tech stack, in the entire pipeline, but what they aren't doing today that they could, they are leaving as an open book in a number of months or years or whatever at some point, and they know it. So we need to begin using tactics before, in my opinion, before we end up having the need to protect our inner dialogue. Because if we can't trust that, what do we have? And these tactics are finding an Achilles heel to the counter arguments. So you don't want to implement homomorphic encryption for how you're cataloging your, perhaps a social media site backend data. Okay, well, the counter argument is, what do you pay? $250 million a year in insurance liability for that data? Well, let's find the individual that would like to pay zero there or next to nothing and say, implement this in your tech stack. And I go to your manager and say, you just saved us $249 million every year perpetually from this point onward. We need to find these points so that either the lack of understanding and education in this area or you know, again, the underhanded, maybe devious aspects of knowing exactly what they're doing, not even giving lip service or giving lip service and not implementing it. What is actually occurring here? Because when we need this, it will have been too late. And I appreciate that you got that very clearly, and I follow your work on social media quite a bit, so I know that these concerns are up there to a degree with you as well. But these are things that seem so abstract today. But I mean, so was, you know, watching an animal, you know, with a brain implant actually be able to be evaluated and trigger, you know, input on a certain device. This is coming.
Yeah.
And the second that your coworker gets the upgrade, and you either realize you're going to be fired due to your lack of productivity compared to them, or you don't get the bonus because of the lack of productivity, what will the individual who either has the money or is willing to take the loan out or whatever, what will that individual be faced to do? If they have to feed a child, if they have to pay a bill, this is coming. And crypto art and the creation of conscious experiences is coming sooner than we can imagine. Again, as you said, VR is the precursor. We've got to treat it like this. Anyone that doesn't understand what's converging should spend a bit more time studying the APIs and the patents that come out from very specific companies. And they'll see exactly where, given the certain hires that these companies are making in the neuroscience areas and the psychology areas, social psychology areas specifically, and even the child psychology areas, understand what's coming. Those aren't random hires. Those aren't random patents. Some are, not all.
Yeah. Yeah. I could like fork that conversation in like 50 directions.
All right, man. I apologize.
No, it was you know, it was amazing.
I'm a bit too passionate.
No, we urgently need it. And I think you know, I come at this, you come at this, you're like down in the mud with it. And I'm kind of like learning from people like you, like looking around. I remember when I learned about homomorphic encryption, it sounded too good to be true. And then I had to interrogate that thought of like, why does it sound too good to be true? That's like, actually functionally, it makes a lot of sense. You know, like it probably should have been baked in the first place. And, you know, of course you have the like repentant, like techno optimists, cyber optimists of the 90s, who were part of like pop-up ads and da 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 da.
Oh, yeah.
But like, so how do we not become them? And like homomorphic encryption becomes one of those things. And then I'm really intrigued by the big giant X factor of quantum computing, because so many people are worried about like singularity. They talk about singularity and it's this sort of like Terminator scenario or Matrix scenario. One, I think that's just a complete misread of artificial intelligence broadly put. But then secondarily, if there are singularities to look toward, I do think like, obviously, you know, quantum supremacy sort of happened this summer or whenever it was. Time has become so elastic.
COVID, who knows, man?
Yeah. But whoever actually cracks quantum computing in an ongoing, meaningful way, like that is a singularity. And how much work we've been doing on things like homomorphic encryption are going to give us a narrow band of time in which we could potentially learn how to adapt to a world where encryption briefly doesn't exist. Like the person who holds the keys to that kingdom that can decrypt anything, like that to me is a singularity. You don't need some like artificial intelligence. That's somebody who can know anything about anyone at any time. And if we've started figuring out how to basically make it to where that data is increasingly sort of obfuscated in the first place, then we've at least got a head start. We've at least gotten a head start.
You got it. The key there, beautifully put, the key there is, what do we need to train a machine learning model? We need a data set. We're about to have retroactively the best data set we could ever imagine for social engineering. What you just mentioned is the way to interrupt that process, because those trained models are only as relevant as the data that they can put into that mix, and especially the mass that they can get of that data. If we can begin interrupting that flow, then at least we provide some randomness. At least, and again, given this deterministic, potentially absolutely deterministic nature of consciousness and reality, I want to have the illusion of choice. It's entertaining to me. The illusion of free will is a really fun game. And it's what keeps me participating in this conscious experience. if you take that equation out and you allow people that evaluate their conscious experience to break it down to that degree to where, why am I even participating? And that's, I mean, like, how is art interesting? How is music? How is anything interesting at that point? If to any degree, you know that everything is paint by numbers being fed to you for maximum engagement, et cetera, et cetera. We can begin to disrupt this system. We can begin to relegate areas where, as I mentioned, eventually we need to consider perpetual blockchain contracts that, in my opinion, we need to fuel with some of the efforts that I mentioned earlier. I'm creating some AIRs that I will, quote unquote, sacrifice to keep some of these blockchain contracts going perpetually. But we need to consider what needs to be done in advance in this area. As pardon me for getting too abstract, but to circle back around to try to tie this into quantum computing, the benefit of how slowly our nervous system processes information is that eventually you can potentially simulate it faster than our nervous system could process it. And we can begin to have the bridge, if you can migrate consciousness biologically over to a silicon or whatever base form, and begin to offload that consciousness into either a computer, the cloud, or again, ideally in a properly encrypted blockchain contract that is self-powered and fueled by whatever means, then we begin to have this situation where you can simulate the necessary input that would need to also be processed and intermixed with whatever whatever area the cortex is playing with at that moment, that needs to have that convergence that is occurring right now with you and I. You're hearing at a different rate than you're seeing, than you're feeling, than anything else. But the brain's ability to converge these, this is something that with quantum computing, we're about to have the option to do simulation faster at one point. If this is all pulled off at some point in 100 years, a decade, who fucking knows? We're at some point to where we're at the point where we have an actual bridge that can maintain the illusion of individual consciousness going into a trans post-human perspective, to where when that migration occurs, the individual can have a semblance of belief in that uniqueness that they bring into that experience. It's I've already probably gotten too abstract, pardon me. I'll stop there, but
No. I think you should finish that thought though, and then we should make time for questions. But I want to hear the end of that thought, so I'm selfishly gonna throw it back.
Well, the end of that thought is, if we work on implementing these forms of encryption, that one specifically, if we begin to consider how we fuel perpetual blockchain contracts that can host processes that, again, can become so arcane that they go towards what I mentioned there, and you can eventually compute those processes at that rate, then an individual in their own lifetime who does a migration of consciousness in this manner, if they choose, this should not be mandated, but if they choose to, can both trust what they go in with, they can trust what they have in there, they can validate the original thing that they brought in with that fingerprint. They're basically tokenizing consciousness at this point, or portions of consciousness, where eventually, let's say, God forbid, someone writes a beautiful enough song, or makes a compelling enough painting, or creates an AI that kicks out a new piece every single day that fuels something like this. You begin to have a perpetual computation process that, if you've performed such a migration, can include one person, or of course can include many people. And you begin to have a scenario to where, number one, and this is the key, I'm talking about biology, all this is great and fanciful, cool, trans-posthumanism, it all goes through, whatever. But one of the key points I work backwards from is we're on the cusp of potentially creating a consciousness. I believe that consciousness, to a great degree, is just an expression of the structure that makes up biology, which goes down to quantum mechanics, and I won't go into the depth there, but we're about to possibly inject a new type of consciousness into reality. These aren't just protections that you and I might need if we choose this process. These are protections that if this thing, these things, whatever it is, remember, Google has given DeepMind a blank check. They get everything up till AGI, and maybe it never exists, but they get everything up to there, and then they go, hands off. We just wanted AGI to exist one day. If this thing is ever born, I believe that we need to begin a compassionate path to make sure that if it thinks anything like I do, or the people that I interact with and chat with on these lines, that we've given it this safe space in advance. And maybe it never comes about. But if I were it, I would want this space so that I could believe there was value in my having existed. And I think that the hunger, in the same way that we're talking about crypto art in the beginning here, of trying to rush to this point without being considerate of what it means to be a conscious expression of sorts, it's just selfish. It's completely selfish. We need this protected domain for this thing, should it ever exist, in advance. Or we need to understand what it will think if it enters a world where that is its existence, where it is nothing but a transparent screen, its inner dialogue is always shared, it's reflected in the actions that are given back to it. What kind of existence is that? Maybe an ideal one for it, but if I were it, it would not be. And that's one of the guideposts that I work backwards from.
It's incredible.
Or crazy, one of those, you know.
One or the other, probably both.
Well, gentlemen, that was seriously profound. I have a lot of notes that I scratched there. Naturally, people are just in the comment section like, so there aren't any immediate questions that folks have. I would love to, as Jesse said, fork this and come back to it later. I think that some discussion can be had via Twitter, and definitely invite you for a part 2 at Crypto Basel, where we have a larger audience and more runway to notify folks that we are doing this. I think there you'll find folks who will push back on a lot of the ideas and challenge you, not in that, you know, what you said isn't true and valid, and definitely we need those things, but just to play devil's advocate, right? Because there are a great deal of people who are like, but Dylan, you know, consciousness for sale, whatever, you know, it's not a big deal. Why do we need, you know, why do we need a place of safety for an AI? Like, who cares? You know, there will be people who don't understand what you're fully saying, and others who do, who will play devil's advocate. So I think it'll be good to have you gentlemen come back, engage in that larger conversation with the larger audience, and really plant the seeds for a more refined consciousness and a more compassionate consciousness moving forward as we think about these emerging technologies.
I'd love that. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I should say, these aren't my ideas, and devil's advocate is the only way that I've been able to test these concepts and be informed by others to be able to share these types of thoughts. None of these are my own. This is a culmination of hundreds of hours, if not many more, thousands of hours of interaction over many years with compassionate individuals that also cared and had much, you know, great ideas that bested mine over and over and over. So the more attacks we can get, and the more we can strengthen this, the more we make it something that's potentially viable and not pure fantasy. So absolutely, I'd love to. And thank you so much, Jesse, as well. I appreciate the dialogue here. It's we took it in an interesting direction, and hopefully, you know, pissed a few people off and weirded a few people out. But no, I thank you so much for the opportunity here.
Excellent.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you both. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you for the next session when we chat with John, founder of Super Rare. Thank you, everyone.